Welcome to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. My name is Patrick Ledden, and each week I have the opportunity to sit down and talk to an executive leader. I learn about their work, their struggles they've overcome, the successes they've achieved, all with one thought in mind: to help you to have a more effective career. Today's conversation is with a gentleman named Scott Ward. Scott Ward is an executive leader in the luxury hospitality space. He has worked at and run facilities from the islands of Grenada to the mountains in Vail, Colorado, and everywhere in between. And in our conversation today, we'll talk about listening, about empathy, about building something historic, and recognizing the best way to problem solve is to bring others into the conversation. Trust me, you're going to want to grab something to write with, sit back and take some notes as Scott Ward and I have a C-Suite conversation. Scott Ward, welcome to C-Suite Conversations. Thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here. Great to see you.
Good to see you too. So glad to have you join us today. I told folks on the introduction a little bit about your career, that you've been from Grenada along the coastline up on the island all the way up to the mountains in Colorado and probably everything in between. But that doesn't necessarily tell them a little bit about who you are or what you've learned along the way. Would you mind kind of peeling back the Scott Ward story a bit for us?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation. I've spent about 25 years in the hospitality industry, and I fully admit that I'm not sure how I got into it. In fact, I tell a lot of people that I got into it by accident, but I can't imagine doing anything else. I feel truly blessed to be in this industry because, in the hospitality industry or in the hotel industry, you're really at the front line of some of the most important times of people's lives. In the beginning of somebody's lives, the end of their lives, the special moments of their lives, and celebrations of their lives. So we really play a very, very unique role in people's lives. There's a term that we have in our industry called heads and beds. And I always say that it's not really about the heads and beds. It's about really providing that unique experience to these guests. And so being in the Caribbean, I spent almost 15 years in the Caribbean in a variety of the islands. In fact, I would say most of the islands. I have to say that it grounded me because it made me feel really blessed to have that opportunity to be in that place at that time. Because, in some of the Caribbean islands, you're in some of the resorts, some of the largest employers. And so that's an awesome responsibility that you have. But also to see people's experience, introducing them to something very, very unique that they may not have where they come from. So it was fun, but met amazing people. And I've taken what I've learned in the Caribbean, and applied that to many of the roles within the different islands, as well as here in the United States.
So you say you kind of just ended up in this industry. I'm curious, what was that path? How did you end up in the hospitality space?
Really, just it goes back to I'm originally from the Chicagoland area. I had a friend of mine that said that he was going to buy a resort in the Caribbean. He said, "Hey, Scott, can you help me?" I'm like, "How difficult can it be?" Because when you think about going to the Caribbean, of course, you only think about the good things. Laying by the pool, drinking a cocktail, going sailing. But what you don't realize is that you're in a foreign country. There are different laws and customs that you have to adapt to, and it was a unique challenge for me, but something that I feel so blessed to be a part of because I think you become a better leader, you become a better person outside of your comfort zone. And those many years of being in the Caribbean forced me in some situations that they don't teach you some of those situations in business school, but you learn to adapt. You make some mistakes along the way. You learn about those mistakes. In fact, some of those mistakes that, in the Caribbean that I made that I still have learned from, and I carry that as one of my creative, one of my pillars of building teams, successful teams, and turning around resorts. So, in a lot of ways, I believe everything happens for a reason, and I'm glad it happened to me.
Well, I have to tell you, I grew up in Chicago area too, and none of my friends invited me to go to the Caribbean to work in a resort. In fact, my buddy said to me, "Let's join the army." So I kind of had the antithesis of that experience, but I joined the
Yeah,
army with him.
yeah,
But okay, so you mentioned a moment ago, you said you worked in a number of different places in the Caribbean, and you learned some things that kind of became pillars of how you approach leadership. What are some of those pillars? Give us some insight there.
yeah, yeah. I there was one person who was a very wise person. He was a gardener, and he kept on telling me it isn't always about money. It's about respect, and I never forgot that. And um, that is something that I carry on to this day. What his name was Amos, and I still remember his name, and I still remember that conversation because what I was doing is coming into trying to solve a problem by saying, listen, I can provide you more hours. I can do this for you. But it really wasn't about that. It was about understanding where the team was, each team member was dealing with. And it wasn't necessarily about the money. It was about providing respect to each one of them, being mindful to their time and their personal life, and doing it in a respectful manner that put us not necessarily on equals, but recognize some of the personal things that they were going through. Um, I think from that standpoint, I still carry that with me today. The other thing is that we solve problems together. We don't go in there with an iron fist thinking that we have all of the answers. Because I've learned a long time ago thinking that I have all of the answers. And yeah, a lot of my ideas in my own mind are great, um, but they may not always work. And even though um, my idea might be good, by bringing in the community, the team together, that one idea that I came up or with one of the other team members came up with, all of a sudden becomes a better idea because it becomes a better concept. Or even better, we have a problem, we have an issue, how can we solve it? When you're put into a situation where you are in a foreign country and you don't necessarily know all the customs and all of the rules and the business acumen, um, you're forced to say, how do I solve this problem? And I really learned from those conversations of that, listen, let's come into this as a team to try to figure out how to get through that. And I think, Patrick, you and I have talked in the past that, I go into hotels and I help them turn them around or take them to the next level. And a lot of times when I come into a new project or a new hotel, that's one of the first things I do is get the team together and saying, how can we solve this problem? We're here. How do we go to the next level? Because every problem, every resort, every situation is different. And what might apply in one island or one resort in one town may not be or may not work in the next location.
No, it makes perfect sense. I am curious. You talked about recognizing the respect versus the money issue, as that gentleman told you about, and that gets down to understanding like what motivates, what matters to each individual, and how that might be different, and listening to them and asking them good questions. And the same thing with the problem solving, right? Asking them good questions, letting them bring ideas to the table. Both of those rely on a sizable amount, or at least a growing amount of trust in those relationships, and you're willing to extend yourself. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely.
So how do
Absolutely.
you do that when you're brought in and okay, you are coming to another location, a place where it is a different place for you, and you're being brought in to turn around something, which typically means there might not be performing optimally.
Yeah.
How do you get through that barrier that might be there because you're the new person coming for change and you may not understand all the idiosyncrasies of the world?
Yeah, yeah, and you hit it right on the spot. Is it is about trust. It's establishing trust. And I'll give you an example. I was in an iconic resort. It was built in the 1950s. Every president had been there since Eisenhower, but it had lost its way. And unfortunately, I had to go in and make some unfortunate decisions to downsize the department. And so going into, I don't want to call it a hostile environment, but essentially it was a hostile environment where, team members had to transition maybe to another department or another area. Um, and opposed to sitting into the chair of the director, I put my office right in the middle of everybody. And every single day we had a meeting, we had a stand up, and we talked about the history, about the culture, about where we are now and where we need to be. And I spent most of my time listening, gathering information, and then creating the plan to get to that next level, not by myself, but empowering the team members to get us to that next level. Because in that particular situation, and frankly, in most situations that I walk into, I know a little bit, but the team members know the property much better than myself. And so chances are they probably have the answers. Maybe they weren't given the opportunity to give their answers or their solutions in some instances. But here's an opportunity to empower them to come up with the solutions. And then, frankly, Patrick, 9 times out of 10, the solutions are within the team. They need to be vetted. And just like that example that I said, one idea becomes a better idea with the collective team. And that has served me so well. And in that particular instance, that resort went from almost becoming bankrupt to turning itself around, in less than 15 months, which is an extraordinary time frame. And probably about 2 years later, I ran into the owner, and he thanked me for that. And I remember telling him, I said, "Don't thank me. It's the team." Because at the, as you know, as leaders, we're really just guiding, we're tweaking, we're empowering, we're motivating, we're mentoring our team to become better than what they think they are. And so I think as a team, one person didn't do it, and it's very cliche. There's no I in team, but it really, in my experience, in the projects that I've been involved with, it's all about the team. There's no way that I could come in and do it by myself. There's, a resort or a hotel is like a city, and it takes multiple disciplines to get it to that next level.
As you were going through that, I was just thinking about other people who may have stepped in your shoes, or maybe when you were doing it your first couple of times, trying to, find your groove as a leader, trying to do these turnaround types of situations. It seems like sometimes the natural inclination, because you're coming in, there's expectations, right? You're being brought in to meet some expectations for sure. And you might feel the pressure of time. This type of situation seems like, oh my gosh, it could be just faster if I just went in there and told them to do this and put myself in my normal office and we kind of ran things. Did you have to learn your way into that, Scott? Did you intuitively know it? Did you see somebody else struggle? How did you start to realize, no, I don't need to be down the hallway in the office. I need to be in the middle. And by the way, the best answers are probably not coming out of my gray matter, but other people's.
Yep. Yep. And that goes back to my, some of my first experiences in the hotel industry. And that is, you know, thrown into a situation where you have to solve some problems and you don't have the answers. And, that was one of the advantages of working overseas, because you are you're in unfamiliar locations and situations, and you have to rely on other people that know the situation much better than yourselves. Um, and so that really forced me in that situation. And I think my first reaction, and I could admit that now, was, we're going to do it my way because I think this is where we need to go. But when you're forced into a situation where your idea is good, but you don't know the steps, the processes, maybe the statutory reasons why you can and can't do certain things, because you don't know all of the rules and laws and regulations and customs. So you have to rely, and it really did force me to do that. But it has served me well as I look back 20 years later. I still remember some of those life lessons, and some of those first few months, I was doing it. Hey, this is the direction that we need to go, and not getting the outcome that I was expecting, and it was frustrating. And I was questioning myself: why aren't they listening? And or is you're questioning, is the path not the right path? And so when you start to open up yourself, I don't want to say, I guess you can say that you become vulnerable, and you need their help, and it forces you to go out and ask for that help. But those life lessons in those first few months, in that first resort, in that first country that I'm not that familiar with, all of a sudden forced me into a new way of learning, and a new way of being a leader. And to this day, 20 years later, I still use those concepts.
It's as you were saying that, I thought about the times where I've had those moments, like those head slap moments where you're like, why aren't they doing what I asked them to do? I
Yeah.
told them, I trained them, I put it in an email, I came up with a cool acronym. We have coffee mugs and t-shirts that say to do this thing, and they're not doing it. And I think I've come to learn, it's because it's usually I'm telling them, I'm encouraging them, I'm doing all these things, and I'm not necessarily asking them.
Yeah.
And there's something very powerful, I think, see what you think about this, but there's something very powerful in getting people's fingerprints all over situations and solutions, as opposed to just mandating. And sometimes that little switch that you can flip makes all the difference.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the key is to empower people, your team members. Everybody's equal. Everybody in the team plays an equal role into a solution. And I think once people realize that they have that ability to change the trajectory, not necessarily for themselves, not necessarily for the department that they're in, but for the company as a whole, now all of a sudden they look at that problem a little bit differently, that it isn't just my problem, or our department as a department. The department is one of many departments within the organization. Now all of a sudden you have the empowerment to change the trajectory of that company. And now all of a sudden that problem isn't just a small problem, or a solution, I'm sorry, a small solution. It's a big solution, because it's solving a lot of the solutions, or a lot of the problems of the company, um, from a resort standpoint. So I think when I look at team member development and mentoring, it's all about solving the problems as a team collectively. And 20 years, it has done me very, very well.
When we started out, you were talking about the reality that working in the hospitality industry that you work in, and the types of resorts and facilities you've worked in, you're often there during these important moments in people's lives. You said, from the beginning to the end, and every high point in between. And then you also mentioned that when you're in some of these islands, you're like the biggest employer on the island. So
Mhm.
I'm just kind of thinking about those two things as anchor points for understanding like the purpose of your facility, or the impact you can have as an organization. Do you find that, not just in your own head, but also talking to your people about that purpose, like, hey, if we do this well, we really impact people's lives. We're not just, resting heads, like you said, or filling stomachs. We're actually, impacting people's lives. We're impacting the island. I mean, do you talk about that to folks? And if so, how do they tend to respond when you start kind of asking them to look at their work through that lens?
Yeah. When you start to look at us as an organization of just heads and beds, it becomes a numbers. It becomes all numbers. But what you don't realize is that what people are going through in their own journey in life, when they come through your doors, you have no idea what they're going through. And so you need to put yourself in that situation of, what are they going through? How can you impact their life? What are they doing here that's going to impact their life? That it's not just about a stay overnight. It's about creating a very, very unique experience that will be mindful for the rest of their life. And I'll give you an example. I was opening up a private island resort in the British Virgin Islands, and we had just um, had an article in the Sunday New York Times travel section, which is the most coveted article from a travel industry to be in that coveted Sunday section. Well, we ended up getting a lot of reservations. And so we ended up getting I ended up getting a call from the reservations team, and they said there was somebody on the call and they're very important. And I took that call, and, this person said they're very important and they only have, 1 week of their year with their family. So I got all of their information. I put together an itinerary for them. I happened to be in New York. I met them in New York. I put together the itinerary with them. They liked it. Fast forward a couple of months, I happened to be on the property when they were there. One of the excursions that I had booked for them was the two boys and sons to go fishing. I happened to be on the deck, took a photo of them, of their family with all the fish. They had a great time. Fast forward another year, I'm in New York. I call them, I say, I'm in New York, just wanted to say hi. This time he invites me into his office. And so this person was a major person in a major bank. This time he invited me into his office through security. And so I go into his office, and we're just having a nice chat. And I'm looking behind his desk of all of these world leaders, of Reagan and Gorbachev and stars. But in all of those photos, in the middle of all of those world leaders, was the photo that I took of him and his family with the fish. So I always tell that story because that particular vacation impacted his life. 2 years later, that photo is the center of all of his photos of all of those world leaders. And so I use that example is because, you just never know how you're going to impact somebody with their vacation. And so, I worked with, Horst Schultz, the founder of Ritz-Carlton, and he always talked about, our guests, could buy our resorts, but what we provide them is an experience that they can't buy. And so you really create these one-of-a-kind, unique experiences that are meaningful to them as a person, as a life. I mean, think about yourself, Patrick, when you go to somebody's house, or maybe even at your house, chances are there's photos of vacations and trips. I mean, all the blogs and photos of when you go hiking, all of those photos, those are very meaningful to you. And so when people go to a resort or go on vacation, it's a very, very meaningful part of their life. And we play such an integral part of that. And so it's not about those heads in beds. It's not about the four walls. Almost every hotel in the world, except for one in St. Lucia, has four walls. The one in St. Lucia only has three walls. And so it's what you do outside of those four walls that makes that impact.
That makes such great sense. And I can just imagine, helping people understand that regardless of their role in the organization really does go a long way toward increasing their engagement in solving problems and making decisions and being empowered, because you can't walk around and watch every room being clean, nor should you want to, or any other thing going on. So the idea of helping people understand, like, this is why we're here, this is the impact we have. I think that that transcends any industry, regardless of anybody listening to the conversation today. Now, as you were going along, you were talking about things like finding yourself in unfamiliar situations, or you talked about impacting people. And I think this, Scott, that I taught a class at Vanderbilt for a number of years about leading business through times of crisis. And crisis is those moments. Sometimes your character might be more forged in those moments. It might be more revealed in those moments. Maybe it's a little bit of both that kind of happens, but your industry's gone through certainly a lot of crisis, a lot of disruption, a lot of change. Take me back, I guess, for the purposes of today's discussion, given that it's 2005, it wasn't that long ago. Like, take me back, like pre-COVID, through COVID, post-COVID. Like, what did you learn through that journey?
Yeah, it's when you think about the last 30 years of the banking crisis and all of the different COVID, and I love positive COVID stories. And the one thing about our industry is that you learn to adapt very, very quickly, and our industry has learned to adapt through all of these situations. When you go through the banking crisis, the strong companies survive. The ones that were just starting out probably did not do very, very well. However, you learn to adapt. For example, during COVID, the many hotels opened up their lobbies. They weren't getting the guests that they were getting for staying overnight, but they were bringing them in food and beverage, Wi-Fi, providing places for people to meet. In Florida, our resorts became very, very busy because we learned that we could still host meetings. Our rooms were still open, but our resorts had beaches and pools, and so there was a lot of outdoor space where people could have meetings. Food and beverage. Now all of a sudden, it wasn't about going into a restaurant. It's putting it in a bag and selling it through the bag, or how a lot of hotels where they learn to adapt by food and beverage by doing carry out to survive. So our industry is very, very resilient. And has learned to adapt very, very quickly into the situation. You downsize the organizations, but you learn to refocus them into other areas. And COVID was a great example. Whereas maybe the resorts up north were a little bit more restrictive, whereas in Florida it was some of our busiest times ever. But what we ended up doing is redeploying people. Salespeople were cleaning rooms. Housekeeping was also cleaning rooms, but maybe we were also working in food and beverage. Maybe we were doing not necessarily DoorDash, but we were taking meals and delivering meals that people were asking. So it was a way to adapt to keep people employed, utilize the organization. Because listen, we're in the business to say yes. We're in the hospitality business. So what better way to go out and take what our food and beverage operations, our convention service people, and bring the food to them.
So now you're on the other side of COVID, but certainly plenty of other disruptions going on. But you have a disruption going on or a change going on in regard to growth and expansion. And talk about a little bit about what's going on at the Saddlebrook Resort right now, where you're at. And every time I seem like I see you on social media occasionally, and I just see like some big new construction project or change going on. And that change is exciting, but it's kind of hard to say yes to some things if you don't have the building yet or the space yet. I mean, what are you learning from that expansion side of things?
Yeah, I mean, this is an iconic resort. It was built in 1979. It's primarily known as a tennis resort. Some of the top tennis players in the world in the 80s and 90s, and most likely trained here. We still have a number of top 10 and top 100 players that stay here or that train here. We actually have a prep school with 60 students that has been there. Arnold Palmer actually started the school back in the early 80s as a golf academy. It grew to the Hopman program. Harry Hopman was one of the top doubles players in the 50s. His program moved here in the early 80s, and it quickly became one of the best sports programs in the world. But like anything, it's gone through good days and bad days, and so here we are, 40 years later, with new ownership, taking this iconic resort with this iconic history, and turning it into something special. The disruption is you take something that was iconic, 20 or 30 years ago, maybe lost its way over the years for a variety of reasons. And now you have the awesome responsibility to take this precious asset that has such a history to it and take it now to the next level.
Yeah.
Through plans, through renovations. But one of the first things that I did is started to collect all the stories, the photos, the videos of the past, because those are the things that we want to celebrate. and make sure that we document all of that history and make sure that we have that available. And that's part of the future, is the history. But then when you go into a new organization that maybe has not changed, you come in here with new ideas. You want to change things really, really fast. But you have to take that opportunity to listen to what they did in the past, and learn from it. And I think it's up to us from a mentorship to saying, okay, here's our opportunity to make some change, some positive changes. But I also think that, going again back to my great ideas, that I think some of these ideas are so great, is to understand that maybe some of those ideas that I came in with that weren't so great as well, for a variety of reasons. But I think from a disruption standpoint, here you are in a 500 room resort. Now we have construction. Um, you have to have the ability to sell a resort when, during a time where there is construction going on, and how is that going to impact them, and what is that disruption going to be like? And so I always like to take the negative and turn it into a positive. And here's a great opportunity to tell the story, the new story of the new Saddlebrook, and make them a part of that journey. We have a lot of repeat guests, so it's our opportunity to hear the history. And so, we have a special out there. You bring a photo, you give us a story of a moment at Saddlebrook. And so we're creating this storyboard, both on the digital side and on the physical side of the new lobby, where these old stories will be a part of the new Saddlebrook. And then also, as people check in, they're worried that there might be noise. We assure them that there won't be any noise that's going to disrupt their vacation. But then we take that opportunity to tell the story of that new opportunity, what the resort will be. Here's photos, here's videos, what it's going to be like when it's all finished. We invite every single guest that comes in here for a tour of what the new rooms will look like, what the new ballrooms, what the new amenities will look like. It's just a great opportunity for them to see what the future is going to be like. Because again, we want them to be a part of that new Saddlebrook. And even though they may see some construction, we minimize that through barriers and signage. But sometimes we understand that events might have to be moved, or maybe it's not what they thought it was going to be. And so we do everything that we can to make sure that doesn't affect their experience. But what we do is we do what's called a bounce back. Everybody that stays here is going to have an opportunity to come back and experience the finished product later on as well. So they can say that they saw it then.
As you were saying that, I pictured, like, in my work, I get to stay at a lot of hotels, right? Get to travel a lot of places. And sometimes it's really easy to just make it the place to rest your head because you're in, you're out, off you go. But even when I'm traveling by myself, if I'm in a hotel that has some history to it, that's been around for a while, that has an interesting story to tell, and you walk down the hallways and they'll have some of those physical pictures hanging up on the hallway. It is really interesting. Oh, there used to be a train, and here's how they used to come here, and here's it. Just, you get this story, and you feel like you're part of something, as part of a history of something. So let me phrase it to you this way, Scott, as we wrap up. Imagine that I'm looking at a wall that's the story of Scott's career, and there's different photos on there, kind of capturing different moments. We've covered a lot of ground and talked a lot about what you've learned, and I've loved that conversation. But let's just identify one more thing, if you can. Regardless of wherever anybody is in their own journey, whatever pictures they've hung on the wall or have yet to hang on the wall, when you look at your career, what's one thing that you would say to everybody listening to this podcast? Hey, it doesn't matter if you're in the C-suite right now, or you're in school, or you've stepped away from the workforce for a while and you might re-enter, wherever they might be. What's just a smart thing that you've learned that they might want to pick up on?
Yeah. Well, the best thing that has served me is to listen. Because the older I get, the more experienced I become. Is I learn so much from people, and I think the biggest attribute that anybody can have is to listen. People, whether you are in the private equity side from an ownership standpoint or a team member, chances are they're going to be giving you breadcrumbs or nuggets. And if you're constantly listening, you'll pick up on those nuggets, and that will be a great guide for you. It's made me a better person to listen. It has made me a better leader to listen. It has made me a better father to listen. So I would say it's the biggest advice I could give to any person is as a team leader or as a fellow team member is to listen to your colleagues, because you'll first of all you'll learn a lot, and you'll find solutions a lot quicker by listening.
Well, Scott, I have been very fortunate to get to listen to you for the last 30 minutes or so and ask you a few questions and just learn about your work and your career. And I know I benefited a lot from it. I'm sure the listeners have as well. And just want to thank you, Scott, for joining us and just wish you all the best.
Well, great. I appreciate it, Patrick.
Well, folks, that's all I have for today's episode. Big thanks to Scott Ward for joining me today. I think we would all agree that the lessons he shared with us extend well beyond the hospitality industry into all of our worlds. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. My name's Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.